Podcast Talk.
Learn English naturally.
Why time management advice never works.
Everyone talks about time management like it's the ultimate solution. But somehow, people feel more overwhelmed than ever.
People plan their days, weeks, even months, and they still go to bed feeling like nothing important was done.
They manage time carefully but can't manage focus, energy, or clarity.
That's because time was never the real problem. It just hides the deeper ones.
Most time management advice sounds logical at first. Wake up earlier, plan your day better, optimize every hour. But real life isn't a checklist. People don't fail because they forget to plan. They fail because plans don't match reality.
People don't actually lack time, they lack clarity. Without clarity, every task feels urgent, every message feels important, and everything becomes overwhelming.
And that pressure shows up clearly in language and the way people explain themselves, justify their busyness, or apologize for resting.
Busy language sounds rushed and defensive. Productive language sounds calm, clear, and intentional.
And once you notice this difference, you start hearing it everywhere.
That moment you described, Maya, when people realize they've been running nonstop without moving forward, I've felt that myself. You wake up already tired, check your phone, start reacting, and suddenly the day is gone. And the worst part is, you don't even remember what you actually chose to do. Everything just happened to you.
Yes, exactly, Ethan. And when people describe their days, I hear this strange mix of pride and exhaustion. They say, I was busy all day, almost like it's proof of worth. But underneath that, there's disappointment. Because being busy didn't bring relief, progress, or satisfaction. It just brought more pressure.
I think that's because busy became a socially safe answer. If you say you're busy, no one questions your effort. No one asks if what you're doing actually matters. And over time, people stop asking themselves that question too. They just keep moving.
That's such a good point. I've noticed people feel uncomfortable when there's silence or space in their schedule. They rush to fill it. Meetings, messages, small tasks, anything to avoid stopping. Because stopping forces you to ask hard questions.
And those questions are uncomfortable, like, is this work meaningful or am I choosing this or just reacting? Time management advice rarely talks about that. It skips straight to tools and systems.
And tools feel comforting. They give the illusion of control. A new app, a new planner, a new method. It feels like progress. But without reflection, it's just movement, not direction.
I had a phase like that. Optimized everything, mornings, evenings, weekends, and somehow felt more exhausted than before. Yeah, that's when I realized I was managing time but ignoring energy and meaning.
That resonates so much. People blame themselves when they're tired instead of questioning the system they're following. They think they're weak, not overloaded.
And language exposes that belief. Listen to how often people say, I should be doing more. That sentence carries guilt, not motivation. And guilt never creates sustainable productivity.
Maybe real productivity starts when people allow themselves to slow down and choose. Not do more, but do what matters.
Let me say this clearly, Maya. When people feel constantly busy, it's rarely because they don't know what to do. It's because everything feels equally important. Emails, messages, small tasks, they all demand attention at the same level. And when everything feels urgent, nothing feels meaningful. That's where exhaustion begins.
Yes, and that's when people lose their sense of choice. They stop deciding and start reacting. I've heard so many people say, my day just disappeared. But days don't disappear. They get filled by things we never consciously chose,
And reacting all day is mentally expensive. It drains energy faster than focused work. That's why people finish the day exhausted but unsure what they actually accomplished. They worked hard, but without direction.
And this is exactly where people start blaming themselves, Ethan. They say things like, I should be more disciplined or I need to push harder. But they don't see how much mental energy was spent just reacting all day. Answering messages, switching tasks, making tiny decisions nonstop. That kind of exhaustion doesn't show up in any planner.
That's such an important point, Maya. Because when people feel tired without visible results, they assume something is wrong with them, not with the system. And that's dangerous. It slowly teaches people to distrust their own limits instead of questioning unrealistic expectations.
I've seen that happen so often. People stop listening to their bodies, their focus, their emotions. They just force themselves to continue. And English reflects that pressure clearly. You hear more, I should, more I have to, and less I choose.
And that difference matters because language shapes how we experience our days. When everything sounds forced, life feels heavy. But when people speak with choice and intention, even busy days feel lighter. That's the part time management advice never talks about.
You know, Ethan, what really stands out to me is how people describe their days afterward. They don't say, I chose this or this mattered. They say, the whole day just happened. That language is important. It shows they were reacting, switching, answering, adjusting constantly. And when your day is built on reaction, even success feels empty because nothing felt intentional.
Exactly, Maya. Reaction feels productive in the moment, but it quietly drains control. You answer one message, then another, then solve a small problem, then another. By the end, you've been useful all day, but not effective. And no time management system warns you about that trade-off.
And that's why people keep searching for new methods. They think the problem is the tool, not the pattern. But the pattern stays the same. React first, reflect later, if ever. English exposes this perfectly through phrases like, I had no time, or everything was urgent. Those phrases sound passive for a reason.
Passive language often hides exhausted decision-making, Maya. When every choice is tiny but constant, the brain gets overloaded. That's decision fatigue. And when people are tired of choosing, they stop choosing at all. They default to what's loudest, closest, or most demanding.
That explains why people feel guilty even on quiet days. They didn't do enough, even though their minds were working nonstop. Emotional labor, constant awareness, constant availability, none of that shows up on a task list, but it consumes real energy.
I see that all the time, Maya. People confuse exhaustion with commitment. If they're tired, they assume they're dedicated. But dedication isn't about how drained you feel at the end of the day. It's about whether your energy went into something meaningful. When effort has no direction, fatigue grows, hurry and progress disappears.
Exactly, Ethan. And because of that, people rarely stop to ask a simple question. Why am I doing this? They jump straight to, how can I do more? That small shift changes everything. It keeps people busy but disconnected from purpose.
Let me put it simply, Maya. When purpose disappears, time management turns into a distraction. People reorganize their calendars instead of rethinking their priorities. They move meetings, change routines, adjust reminders, and feel productive for a moment. But the real issue stays untouched because it's easier to rearrange time than to face the uncomfortable truth of what should be removed.
Yes, and I've done that too, Ethan. I cleaned my schedule like it was a room I could finally organize. I made it look perfect. And then I realized the problem wasn't the schedule. The problem was that I kept saying yes to things I didn't even want. A calendar can't fix people pleasing.
Exactly, Maya. And that's why advice like to just wake up earlier can feel no, almost insulting, because it assumes your life is only about hours. But for many people, the real battle is boundaries, saying no, choosing what matters, protecting attention. Without that, earlier mornings just create longer stress.
And people don't learn boundaries from a productivity video, they learn them from painful experiences, burnout, resentment, feeling invisible while always being available. That's why this topic hits so hard. Time management advice fails because it treats humans like machines, and humans aren't machines.
And when people finally reach that point of burnout, Maya, something interesting happens. They stop asking for better systems. They start asking deeper questions. Questions like, why am I always available? Why do I feel guilty when I rest? Those questions have nothing to do with time. They're about identity, expectations, and fear of disappointing others.
That fear shows up so clearly in language. People say things like, I can't slow down right now, or this isn't the right moment to rest. And, and somehow that moment never comes. Rest becomes something postponed indefinitely. Not because there's no time, but because rest feels undeserved.
And that belief is dangerous. When rest feels undeserved, people push themselves past healthy limits. They don't listen to fatigue, they ignore signals. Eventually, productivity collapses, not because of laziness, but because the system breaks down. Time management advice never warns about that.
I think that's why so many people feel relief just hearing this conversation. Not because we're giving solutions, but because we're naming the problem. When someone finally hears, you're not broken, the pressure softens. And clarity can finally begin.
Okay, Maya, here's the practical moment people actually need. When you feel busy but not productive, don't ask, how can I fit more in? Ask one sharper question. What am I avoiding by staying busy? Sometimes you're avoiding a hard decision. Sometimes you're avoiding a difficult conversation. And sometimes you're avoiding the fear that your current work doesn't really matter. Time management tips don't touch that because that's emotional, not logistical.
That question is scary, Ethan, but it's so real. Because when I'm busy, I often notice I'm doing the safe tasks, the easy tasks, the tasks that look productive but don't move anything forward. And the moment I try to sit down with the one important thing, my brain suddenly wants to clean, scroll, answer messages, anything. That's not a time problem, that's avoidance.
Exactly, Maya. And avoidance is quiet, but it's powerful. It makes you feel active while keeping you stuck. That's why people love advice like wake up at 5 a.m. or use a better planner. It feels concrete. But avoidance doesn't care about your calendar. Avoidance cares about discomfort. If the task feels emotionally uncomfortable, you'll find 100 busy reasons not to do it.
And then people judge themselves for it. They say, I'm lazy or I have no discipline. But honestly, Ethan, a lot of people are not lazy. They're anxious. They're overloaded. They're afraid of failing, so they hide inside busy work. And the sad part is, the more you hide, the more guilty you feel. It becomes a loop.
One thing people rarely admit is how uncomfortable focus can feel. When distractions disappear, there's nothing to hide behind. No notifications, no quick wins, no easy tasks. Just you and the thing you've been avoiding. That silence feels heavy, and many people escape it by staying busy. It looks productive from the outside, but inside, it's avoidance in motion.
And that's why doing nothing feels harder than doing 10 small tasks. Sitting with one important thing forces honesty. You can't blame time. You can't blame other people. At that moment, it becomes clear whether the task scares you, bores you, or challenges your identity. That realization can be uncomfortable.
And once people realize that, they often feel exposed. Busy schedules protect ego. They allow people to say, I'm trying, without facing the risk of failing at what truly matters. That's why advice focused only on time feels shallow. It avoids the emotional cost of meaningful work.
I think that's why so many people feel relief when they hear this perspective. It explains why they're exhausted without calling them lazy. It reframes the problem, not as a lack of discipline, but as a lack of safety around difficult choices. That shift alone can change how someone approaches their day.
When people finally step out of constant pressure, something changes in how they think. Productivity stops feeling like a race. It stops being about proving effort. Instead, it becomes about honesty, with time, with energy, and with limits. That honesty is uncomfortable at first, but without it, every productivity system turns into another source of stress rather than support.
And that honesty forces people to slow down mentally, not physically, mentally. They begin to notice what drains them and what actually moves things forward. Many realize they've been confusing motion with meaning. And once you see that difference, it's impossible to ignore it.
This is why most productivity advice feels frustrating, not motivating. It pushes people to optimize without understanding themselves, to go faster without asking where they're going. Without reflection, speed just accelerates confusion. And confusion, no matter how efficient, still leads nowhere.
I think that's the moment people stop asking for hacks and start asking for clarity. They don't need another trick. They need permission to choose differently, to do less, but do it with intention. And that shift changes not only productivity, but the way people talk about their lives.
At some point, people realize that constantly trying to optimize their time is exhausting by itself. They spend more energy managing productivity than actually creating anything meaningful. Checking systems, adjusting plans, reworking schedules, all of that feels responsible, but responsibility without direction turns into pressure. And pressure slowly disconnects people from curiosity, creativity, and even motivation. That's when productivity becomes survival, not growth.
And survival mode changes how people speak about their lives. They stop talking about what excites them. They start talking only about what they have to do. Conversations become lists, days become obligations. And when language loses excitement, life often follows. That's why real productivity always sounds calmer than people expect.
And that calmness is often misunderstood. People think it means less ambition, less drive. But in reality, it means fewer internal conflicts. When priorities are clear, energy stops leaking everywhere. Focus becomes sustainable, and productivity finally feels supportive instead of punishing.
There's a moment when I realized how deeply this affects everyday conversations. People don't ask how you are because they want an answer. They ask because it's expected. And when someone actually starts answering honestly, the room gets uncomfortable. I've seen people interrupt, joke, or quickly change the topic. Not out of cruelty, but because honesty slows things down. It forces presence. And presence feels risky when everyone is used to rushing through life on autopilot. Well,
I've noticed the same thing, especially at work. Meetings move fast until someone asks a real question, something that doesn't have a quick answer. Suddenly, people look at their screens. Someone cracks a joke. The conversation shifts back to tasks. That moment reveals how uncomfortable stillness has become. Silence isn't neutral anymore. It feels like wasted time, even when it's actually the most meaningful part.
And that discomfort teaches people to keep things shallow, to stay efficient in conversations the same way they stay efficient in life. Short answers, safe topics, no pauses. But real connection doesn't survive that pace, just like meaningful work doesn't survive constant rushing. Depth requires time, and time requires permission to slow down.
What I find most interesting is how rarely people question this lifestyle. Being busy sounds responsible. It sounds mature. But no one really asks what all this busyness is protecting them from. Sometimes it protects them from disappointment, sometimes from fear, and sometimes from realizing that the life they're rushing through isn't aligned with what they actually want. Staying busy keeps those questions quiet.
And once those questions are quiet, it becomes easier to keep going without changing anything. People tell themselves they'll think about it later, after the next deadline, after the next busy season. But later rarely comes. Life keeps filling the space. And slowly being busy replaces being intentional. Not because people choose it, but because they never stop to choose differently. And maybe the real takeaway here is simple. Productivity isn't about squeezing more into your days. It's about being honest enough to notice what you're avoiding and what actually deserves your energy. If this conversation made you pause or reflect, that already matters. Thank you for listening with us. If you enjoy these real, honest conversations about everyday English and real life, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what topic you'd like us to talk about next. We're really glad you're here.